Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be heading over to the Mid-American Conference for some MACtion and taking a look at the Bowling Green Falcons, who are coming off a 7-6 season that included a trip to the 68 Ventures Bowl. They just wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with our spring game on April 12th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is currently a student at the School of Media and Communications at Bowling Green. He is a media and broadcast intern for the Dairyland Collegiate Summer Baseball League. He does play-by-play and is a writer for the Falcon Sports Media Network. He is Rhys Patrykus. He can be found at Rhys Patrykus on X. Welcome to the show, Rhys.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into the sports media and how long you've been covering Bowling Green football?
Yeah, so I kind of just stumbled into it, to be honest with you. I showed up as a freshman the very first week on campus, and they had a little meeting for journalism majors, and they wrote down the names of all the people who had the student organizations in our umbrella company, Falcon Media, and I saw the sports guy. I go, I like sports. Reach out to him. He said, can you meet this day? I said, I sure can, and the rest is history. So I've been covering AG football exclusively for the last 2 years. We have a beat system that we just started prior to last football season, as in the 2023. I've been doing it for about 2 years now, and I've loved every second of it.
Let's move over to the Bowling Green football team. And the Falcons have hired head coach Eddie George. He's a new head coach for him. He spent the previous 4 seasons as a head coach at Tennessee State. What can you tell us about Coach George and what he brings to the table for the Falcons?
Yeah, so just going off of his press conference from a little over a month ago now, or well over a month ago now, I should say. He's going to bring a very hardworking attitude to this team. Not that they didn't have it already. He says that they're going to reteach the fundamentals. They're going to re-go over everything. And his main message was that this team already has the workings of a great Mid-American Conference team, and we saw that last year. So he's just here not to rebuild or really to retool, but he said he's going to re-uptick, I believe is the phrase he used. So I think he's going to bring a hardworking attitude. Obviously, as we all know, he's one of the best running backs in Ohio State football history. He's a running back for the Houston Oilers, Tennessee Titans, had a cup of coffee with Dallas. So I think that kind of is going to give him a little bit of that, hard-nosed type of deal. And he said that he wants to control the ground game, and that's something that was done in the past as well. So he said that he's not going to change anything. He's not going to reinvent the wheel here. He's going to build upon what was already built here and try and take it to the next level.
As it often happens when you get a new head coach, that means new assistants and coordinators. Bowling Green's no difference in that regard, as Eddie George brings in OC and quarterbacks coach Rhys Patrykus, who was previously with George at Tennessee State. Can you describe the type of offense that Coach Patrykus plans to run there at Bowling Green?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit hard to decipher just because of the way, not everything is going to be 100% the exact same when you move between schools. Just looking at Tennessee State's stats last year, their quarterback play was tremendous. They had a great quarterback who threw for over 3,000 yards, had a bunch of touchdowns, was very smart with the football, not any pick. And it looked to me like they ran with the running back committee. And I'm not sure if that's what's going to happen here with Patrykus. But just with the way that Eddie George has been talking, and I would imagine him and Coach Patrykus are on the same page, it seems to me like we're going to see some smash mouth football, which is, you think of the Midwest, and that's exactly what you think of, is we're going to run the ball down your throat then we're going to run it again, and then we're going to run it a little bit more.
Well, let's start with the group that leads the Falcons offense, the quarterbacks. Last year's starter, Connor Bazelak, has graduated. JT Kitna and Camden Orth hit the portal. That leaves only Baron May and Lucian Anderson III, who saw game action in 2024. And while the portal taketh, it also giveth, as they bring in Drew Pine from Missouri via the portal. With Pine not yet on campus this spring, how did the other quarterbacks look?
So I this is just stuff I've heard. Unfortunately, on the spring practice day, I had to work, so I wasn't able to make it to actually see it. But it sounded like there was certainly a lot of room for improvement, which isn't something that you want to hear when you have experienced quarterbacks. May came in. He wasn't much of a starter, but he spent time at Eastern Michigan. He was at Eastern Tennessee State for a while, so he's got experience. He's seen the field here in Bowling Green, and it was really just for one trick play on punt 68 Ventures Bowl. And then with Lucian Anderson, I mean, I've seen more of him just because he's been around a lot longer. The kid has a cannon for an arm. He's got a ton of potential, but I think the issue with that is now he's got to learn an entirely new offense after already being in a system for 2 years. So that might. I think the advantage that gives, or not advantage, but I think the thing is that gives an even playing field for everybody, I think. So it all just comes down to how everybody runs in the offense. And obviously in a spring game, you're not going to, flash all of your cards. So it all kind of just comes down to, what we're going to see in week 1 against Lafayette. But, as of right now, I think the quarterback room could leave a little bit to be desired. But again, as I said, we haven't seen everything yet in terms of offensive play calling.
If you had to guess, do you think the expectation is that Drew Pine is coming to be the starter and he's the likely guy to take the first snap there week 1 against Lafayette?
I would say so. It all just depends on how fast he can pick up the playbook, because going through spring camp with Missouri, he couldn't be here for spring. So that gave Lucian Anderson and Baron May a 3-ish month head start, depending on when he gets here. So it gave them a little bit of a head start on learning the plays and going through the motions, and then getting the most important thing, getting on the same page with all of the receivers. And they have a little bit of advantage there. But my gut tells me that Pine's going to be the one taking the field for the first offensive snap.
All right, you talk about pounding the rock, so let's move over to the running back room. Longtime standout Terrion Stewart portaled his way over to Virginia Tech. Jason Patterson and Jamal Johnson have both graduated. That's over 1,500 yards rushing and 12 touchdowns gone from this room. A guy I thought might get some run was Justin Pegas, but he hit the portal. Markel Porter, and maybe a forgotten name is Payshawn Wimberly, are key names returning to this running back room here in 2025. Wimberly was a team captain in 2024, but was hurt last spring. How has Wimberly's road to recovery been going?
It sounds like it's been so far so good. Everything I've heard about Wimberly is that he's a great guy and he's a hard worker. So I'm not surprised to hear that he's, is looking good. Whether he'll be back 100% for week 1, I would imagine he will, because it's already been a year since his injury. So I think by August he should be good to go. But the thing with BJSU athletics is that they are very tight-lipped, especially about injuries and things like that. So there's not a whole lot there in terms of, they'll allude to things in terms of like how a player's doing in terms of their health, but they won't outright say, he did this, they won't 100% come out and say it.
Yeah, that was last year, Harold Fannin, when he, I think he maybe got a concussion there at towards the end of the season, but no one said anything. And then I think it was just a game left or something, like, okay, is he going to play? Is he going to, get that record?
Yeah.
That was a hot topic.
Yeah, it certainly leaves the fan up for speculation on whether or not, because everyone was on the edge of their seats. And I mean, I had people DMing me. I am, freezing up on top of Dwight Perry Stadium. It's the day after Thanksgiving. Miami's in town. It's, you win and you go to the MAC championship game, and I'm up there shivering, trying to text people back. I don't see him out on the field, and then finally, all of a sudden, I'd already texted my friends and been like, guys, I don't see him yet. The tight ends are out here, and then like a phoenix coming out of the ashes. Here comes Harold Fan Jr. out of the tunnel. But I digress with that one. But back to Wimberly in the running back room. I think Wimberly should be good to go for week 1. That's just what my gut tells me based on the timeline we're at right now.
So how did the rest of this room look in the spring? I know they got a JUCO transfer.
Yeah, everything I'd heard is that the JUCO transfer, Chris McMillian, he looked very good. I wasn't able to make it to the spring game, so I wasn't able to see that firsthand. But it sounded like he was playing really well. In terms of season production, right now he's got the most rushing yards of anybody in that room, because you've got Payshawn Wimberly, who was really buried on the depth chart by Terrion Stewart and Jason Patterson, and Jamal Johnson and the other guys before them. So, he hasn't gotten the field much, but I think they'll make a nice 1-2 punch. Wimberly is more of a finesse guy, and from what I've seen, it looks like McMillan is more of that guy who's going to go between the tackles.
So who's stepped up? I know you weren't able to be at the game, but during practices and things that you're hearing, who has to step up in this running back room?
I think it's going to have to be one of the redshirt freshmen. I have a list here just of guys. You got Nakai Mockery, who's a redshirt freshman. You got Markel Porter, Cameron Petaway. One of those guys is going to have to step up, because they obviously it's a different regime, but in talking to Scott Leffler last year in August at the Mid-American Conference does like a football kickoff every year just to kind of get the gears turning on the season, where media outlets can come and talk to coaches. And we talked to him, and he said that that running back class was fantastic. So I'm really excited to see what they can bring. And I think especially if Wimberly isn't 100%, to start the season, then they have to pick up the slack, as well as now you bring McMillan into the fold.
And you talked a little bit about this offense and what Partridge's track record has been, but even at UT Martin and Tennessee State, kind of leads me to believe we might have a bell cow. I know you mentioned might be a running back committee. His RB1 averages 170 attempts for 975 yards compared to his RB2, which averages 79 attempts for 455 yards. What have you been able to glean, or what have you been able to hear? Do you think this year it's going to be a running back by committee?
I would guess that it probably would be, just because I don't know who's 100% standing out right now in that sense. But obviously the numbers do show that there's going to be someone who's going to get the bulk of the workload. And I do think even last year with Terrion Stewart and with Jason Patterson and with Jamal Johnson, they ran it by committee, but they also had multiple backs out on the field at the same time. So they were able to kind of play into that a little bit, to where people were getting multiple guys were getting touches, but they were also given the ability to break big plays through misdirection.
So trying to understand this room a little bit more, do you think there'll be like a usage that's like from the end zone to the 20s, and then there's more of a inside the 20 guy or the red zone or inside the 5 guy, or how do you think they divvy out these carries?
Well, I would just, again, based on what I've heard with McMillan being who I think is going to be going through the tackles, I think he's probably the guy you're going to bring in inside the 5, whereas you're going to see Wimberly and some of these other guys outside of the red zone, especially, and outside of the 5-yard line. Kimberly is certainly more of, from what I've seen in his limited workload, the only time I've really seen him able to like get the ball in his hands more than a couple of times was last year's bowl game in the Quick Lane Bowl against Minnesota, where he didn't do a whole lot on the ground, but he had one big carry on the ground. Most of his work was through the air.
If you had to think right now, given the information that you do have, who do you feel like takes that first snap against Lafayette?
I think I am going to say McMillan.
All right, let's turn our attention over to this young wide receiver room. Their leading wide receiver from a year ago, Malcolm Johnson, has graduated. His 78 targets a year ago accounted for 54% of the wide receiver targets. Hakeem Smith was their second leading wide receiver in terms of yards, and he recently hit the portal. That means 113 targets and 923 yards receiving need to be filled. This room is highlighted by the return of Finn Hogan. They also bring in some transfers in Alan Middleton from Southern Illinois and Brennan Ridley from Hampton, who was a Jerry Rice Award nominee. For those not familiar with that award, it's given out to the best freshman at the FCS level. How did the wide receivers look in the spring?
Yeah. So there were a couple of names who were making big plays during the spring, especially during the spring game, and now unfortunately they are in the portal. But I think it'll be nice. You get Finn Hogan back, who hasn't had the numbers, but he's been on the field quite a bit over the last 2 years since coming in from Central Michigan. Of course, you have his breakout game against Georgia Tech in 2023, where he had that beautiful one-handed catch. I think he is going to bring the experience to the room in terms of just who has played on this field before. Outside of that, I think you're going to get RJ Garcia back, who missed all of last year, transferred from Kansas State, and then also bringing in Brennan Ridley, I think, is going to be really nice compliment as well. He was fantastic last year for him, and as you mentioned, he was a nominee for the Jerry Rice Award. So I think it might take a second to come together, just because there's not going to be much outside of what gets done during summer camp. There's not going to be much chemistry with the quarterbacks for some of these guys. So I think it's going to take a second for these guys to get on the same page with the quarterbacks, and it's going to take a second for everyone to learn this new offense. But I think once it does get going, I think this wide receiver room could be a really nice complement to the run game.
Last season, we'll get to the tight end room in a second, but last season we saw a lot of targets go to Harold Fannin Jr. So, not only we'll have a new tight end, but you also have an entirely new staff. Do you think some of those targets, that went to the tight end room last year might go more often to receivers this year? Or
I think there's certainly a chance. Obviously, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. There's so many more tricks up this offensive staff's sleeve. I will say, with the offense that I'm kind of expecting them to run, I think we will see a lot of work to the tight end. Now, whether or not there is going to be a true tight end one, that's to be seen. I'm working on a story right now about one of the tight ends, and just in conversation with him, it sounds like he gave me a quote. He said, "There is no tight end. There's no true tight end one. The tight end one is the tight end room." So I don't know if we're going to see more targets to receivers as opposed to we're going to see more targets to various tight ends. And it's all just going to come down to who Pine or Anderson or May feels most comfortable dealing it to. I would love to see more targets to receivers, because the wide receiver room, and not to knock anybody, because I was a big fan of Malcolm Johnson's game last year, a big fan of O.J. Hilaire 2 years prior. But outside of Hilaire and 22, the wide receiver room has really been stacking a little bit. So I would like to see some more work out on the boundaries. But I think a lot of the lack of production with the receiving room last year just it came down to the fact that your best player plays tight end. And what fool would you be to have, dare I say, the best tight end to ever play the sport?
I mean, the records would say that.
Exactly. You have the best tight end. You have a tight end on pace to have the best season ever. You would be a fool, frankly, not to run the offense through him. So I think that was more of just less game plan and more of just comfortability with having that number one target in Fannin, and also scheming the offense through one of the best offensive players in the country.
There are a lot of young guys in this wide receiver room. I think 6 freshmen or redshirt freshmen. Did any of those younger guys kind of stand out to you this spring and guys maybe look out for in the future?
Yeah, there's a local kid by the name of Wynn Sharp. Went to Anthony Wayne High School just down the road. He, in talking to the receiver coach who is now at Michigan last year in preparation for the season, he said Wynn Sharp is going to be a name to remember. And he got on the field quite a bit last year after some injuries and then just some instances with guys, they got hurt and then took a red shirt. But he was on the field quite a bit. He made his way to the depth chart right behind Finn Hogan in that I believe he was in the X spot. So I think Wynn Sharp is going to be a name to keep an eye on. And then another transfer who's just a sophomore, and Alan Middleton from Southern Illinois. I think he is going to be someone to keep an eye on because he is a very tricky. He had, I don't have my notes in front of me right now. If I recall back to last year at Southern Illinois, he had a couple of games of 100 yards receiving, and then he also had a game or two where he hit 100 yards on the ground. So I think he's going to be a fun little addition to this offense where you lose Raheem Smith, who was kind of that gadget guy, the guy you bring in or you bring around on jet sweeps and stuff like that and wide receiver screens. You lose him, which stinks because I was expecting him to have a big year this year for BG. But you have Alan Middleton right behind him, who I think could be used in a pretty similar sense.
Week 1, who do you think the starters are? You think that's Garcia, Ridley, and Finn Hogan?
I would say yes. That's probably a pretty good bet right there. Depending on how I don't know what Garcia's injury was last year, but just depending on how well he comes back from whatever that injury is, I think he'll be out there for week 1. And also, I'm also kind of coming into this with the mindset of like I'm used to Scott Loeffler's personnel decisions, right? I'm going off of his track record. So these are all just based off of, what my pattern, right? I don't know exactly what George is going to do or what he values compared to what Loeffler valued. But I would say, yeah, I think those are the 3 we'll see.
Well, we finally are going to talk about the tight end group. I know people might get confused because we've talked about it so much already. But let's move over to that tight end group. We just talked about the wide receivers, but the real number one in this room was Harold Fannin Jr. If you were living under a rock in 2024, Fannin had 117 receptions for 1,555 yards and had 11 total touchdowns. With Fannin Jr. off to the NFL draft and the coaching changes, what are your expectations for this group in 2025?
I think they can have probably not the same performance as a group because it's going to be very hard to replicate 117 catches and 1,500 yards receiving. But I think we will see a pretty good year out of these guys. The transfer portal was very kind to BG in the sense of the tight end room. Just before he left, Scott Loeffler was able to rope in Arliss Boardingham, who was a former 4-star tight end down at Florida. Brought in Jiron Johnson, who comes in from Texas Southern, who isn't a big name by any means, but he had a very productive career. He had over 1,000 yards across 4 years with Texas Southern. I think those are two guys to keep an eye on for sure. And there are also a couple younger guys who I think we could keep an eye on. You look at Jacob Harris, who's the son of BJSU legend Josh Harris, who saw a little bit of action last year. He only had a catch or two, I believe. But I think he's someone who could see an increased workload just with – he came in as a receiver, so he's got the athleticism, I think, to be someone who can rip off a big play here and there. So I think kind of, bring back up what I said earlier, I think it's going to be big on tight end by committee, like it's going to be running back by committee. I think we're going to see a lot of different tight ends roped in. And I think the two kind of to keep an eye on the most are going to be Jiron Johnson and Arliss Boardingham. And the thing with Boardingham is he is recovering from an injury. He had surgery within the last month or two to correct it, so he wasn't able to do anything in spring. And so he'll be a little bit behind the 8 ball, but also at the same time, he's not getting on field, but he's also not being able to be on the field is giving him a little bit more time to dive into the playbook, which I think could help in his favor.
So you talked about Jiron Johnson and Boardingham being those maybe top couple guys in this room, with Boardingham being on the shelf here for the spring. Do you think that gives Jiron Johnson that leg up, and maybe, only one tight end comes out week 1? It's probably Jiron Johnson starting?
Yeah, I think at least for the beginning, it'll be Jiron Johnson, just depending on how quickly Boardingham can come back from the surgery. So I think that'll probably give a little bit of a leg up, at least for the beginning portion of the year. But once Boardingham is able to get on the field and see some real game speed, as well as, get back on the practice field, I think he'll slowly begin to take that over. But as I did a breakdown for offense and defense for BG Falcon Media, and I mentioned that Boardingham's on the shelf for a little bit with an injury, and I think Johnson at least breaks spring or summer as tight end 1.
So the offensive line returns 4 of 5 starters, and this group only allowed just over 2 sacks per game in last year. But in 2023, but believe it or not, this unit was even better in 2024. They allowed less than 1.5 sacks per game. How did this group? How did the spring go for this group? And do they look strong once again?
I sure hope so. Just in the sense that, like you said, there's 4 of 5 starters returning, and this unit, the only piece that this unit lost is Alex Wolfschlager, who's now at the University of Kentucky. He was fantastic at right tackle. He was exactly the kind of guy you love to have in the spot. But you still bring back 4 guys who were just as great last year, and I would hope that success from last year continues into this year. If you look at the schedule and who BG played last year, they went up against Penn State and Texas A&M. They didn't allow a sack until that Texas A&M game, which was week 4 by that point. There was a bye week between Penn State and A&M. They went against Abdul Carter and Danny Dennis Sutton. That's the other guy's name. And pressure, but by the end of the game, his last jersey was still white. So I think continuing that over is going to be big. You bring in a couple guys from the portal, or you bring in 2 big guys from the portal. One of them, an Andrew Kilfoyle, who comes in from South Florida. The one thing I don't like about the transfer portal is that these teams' websites update. So I I did as much as I could looking for stuff on Kilfoyle, and the only the most recent thing is from 2023 where he played at guard. Well, both of our guard spots are pretty well filled. So not sure exactly where he's going to slot in, whether he is going to come in at guard and kick someone out to one of the tackle spots. We had last year's week 1 starting left guard Nate Pabst started at left guard, like I said, for week 1 and was in there for the first 6 or so weeks. And then he had to kick out to left tackle because of injury. And then he played at right guard as well. I think he's played everywhere on the offensive line except for center. So he got the malleability there with Pabst. And then there's another transfer that came in just recently, just the other day, actually, from Tennessee State following Eddie George up, Alexis Sanchez. I couldn't really find a ton on him just because there wasn't much of a website or a bio for him on Tennessee State because he had just gotten there by the time Eddie left and came in from Northern Arizona. So there's certainly some bodies there, and I don't think there's going to be much of a I don't think there's going to be much rust to knock off or chemistry to knock off amongst those guys because you're only slotting in one guy. You've got Alex Padgett, who's played center, who started at center every game for the last 2 or 3 years, I want to say. So you've got a lot of continuity, like you mentioned. And so I think the offensive line should be able to continue over that success.
All right, Rhys, if you were to pick one offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who you got?
I don't want to think long and hard on this, but I might have to think long and hard on this because there's a lot of talent on the offense. I think if we would have interviewed a week ago, my answer would have been Raheem Smith, just without a doubt. But I think my breakout performer this year is going to be Markel Porter, redshirt freshman running back. He comes in from Texas, or came in from Texas, I should say, last year. I think, especially if they go by committee, I think he'll get a great opportunity to see a lot of touches. He is a very big boy. He's for a running back. He's 6'1", 220. He's a bruiser. He is a big boy, and he, again, like I said, he comes from Texas, and you know how much football means down in Texas. So.
Well, just like the offensive side of the ball, there's a new coach on the defensive side too. Brandon Fisher is the new defensive coordinator. He comes to Bowling Green after spending the past 4 seasons with Coach George at Tennessee State as their defensive coordinator. Can you describe the defensive scheme that Coach Fisher plans to run at Bowling Green?
Yeah. Again, 100% not sure, just because spring you're not going to throw everything you got there, and just not. Again, I'm kind of kicking myself because I probably could have or should have called off, but wasn't able to make it to the spring game again. And but I do know that just about everywhere Fisher has gone, he's had success. He at Tennessee State last year in points per game, they ranked within the top 50. In yards per game, they ranked 36th overall. The issue is you lose a lot of the starters from last year's defense. You bring in a couple guys from Tennessee State. Jalen McClendon comes in, who plays corner, and you bring in Eric George, who had a phenomenal year last year. He had 8.5 tackles for loss. In his career, he's got 82 tackles. He's got a bunch of TFLs, pretty good amount of sacks. So you bring in a couple of those guys who I think are going to positively impact the defense. But I think scheme-wise, whatever he runs, it's going to work out well. And it's all just going to come down to who steps up for the most part on defense, because it's a lot of young guys and a lot of transfers.
Well, let's dig into the position rooms that Coach Fisher will be coaching, and let's start with the guys up front along the defensive line. This will be a trend, as you kind of talked about, but it'll continue on the defense side of the ball. But this unit loses a lot of production from 2024. In fact, this unit will not have any returning starters for 2025. Evan Branch Haynes will be the main man in the middle, coming back with the most snaps from 2024 with 276. What can you make of this defensive line here? And did anyone stand out to you in the spring?
It's very young, obviously. You've got a couple of guys who are seniors. You have Bam Booker, who is mostly he's been here for 2 years now. He's mostly a special teamer. Hasn't seen a lot of work on the defensive line. You've got Dear Kelly, who saw the field more. He was in the portal. He jumped in the winter. His name's still on the roster. I'm not 100% sure if he's back, if he's 100% back or not. But his name is just, at least for right now, his name's still floating out there. Who saw a lot of the field in 22 and 23, did not see much in 24. They're going to have to rely a lot on those guys plus Evan Branch Haynes. But you've also got some of these not fresh, transfer new guys. I think Malik Moses is going to have a big year. He is a redshirt freshman. You bring in Collins Achiampong, I think that's how you say his name. He who comes in, he was a 4-star prospect in the class of 22. Spent a year at Miami. Spent a year at, I think 23 sounds a little better. Spent a year at Miami. Spent a year at UCLA. Didn't play at all just due to injury. But he's an athletic freak. I found out that 24/7 Sports has this thing called the Freak List, just meant for freak athletes. The guy played basketball in high school, about 9 points a game. Athlete. I think as long as he can stay healthy, he'll have a big role in the defense, and that's someone who they're going to have to rely on as well. And just the fact that he's going to have to bring out that athleticism where some of these other guys won't have it.
Who do you anticipate will make up this defensive line?
So just looking at what I have for my projection last year, I think we're going to see a Chiampong. I think we're going to see Branch Haynes and Malik Moses manning the middle. And this is just a thing that Fisher goes with a 4-man front. I think we're going to see a Chiampong. I think we're going to see Branch Haynes. I think we're going to see Moses. And then whether or not Eric is in the portal or not is going to kind of decide this last spot. Right now I have it as Kelly / Martrice Dillard, who is someone who was originally committed to Vanderbilt. I believe, and then flipped to BG right before he signed. Talented guy, didn't see a lot of the field last year, redshirted last year. I think he is also a guy who has a very good shot to break camp as someone who's going to see a lot of PT. And then also sorry to cut you off. That was also before the addition of Eric George. So I think now with Eric George in the mold, I think he is probably going to be the one to take over that other defensive end spot, as opposed to a Kelly or a Dillard. That was just what I had as of the last month.
I think that's interesting to note about Dillard and the offer from Vandy, because they do a really good job of just recruiting and finding gems that usually when it gets close to signing day, some LSU or some SEC school, other SEC school comes in and nabs them. And if they had their eyes on Dillard, I think that is a interesting note and tidbit to have all season.
Yeah. So he was committed to Vanderbilt right before signing day, flipped to Bowling Green. These were his offers. He had offers from Arizona, Auburn, Charlotte, Cincinnati, Duke, East Carolina, Florida, Florida Atlantic, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, and then Vanderbilt. Mississippi State's in there too. I mean that's a those guys don't recruit just for those guys don't just recruit for they do recruit for depth, but they don't send like this kid was recruited by Jesse Minter and Mike Elston. They don't send those guys to your house to be a depth piece.
Let's move over to the linebacker group, and they graduate Brock Horn and Joseph Sipp Jr. is off to Kansas. Those two accounted for a combined 110 tackles and 10 sacks in 2024. This group is highlighted by the return of guys like Miles Bradley and Justin Eklund. They combined for 26 total tackles last year. How did the linebacking group look in the spring?
So the two names that stuck out to me the most were Lamprin as well as Sefa Sapaio, who's now he hopped in the portal right after spring ball. He's now up the road in Kalamazoo at Western Michigan. But Lamprin, I think, is going to be a dog. I think he's going to take over that Mike role. In 3 years, Dayton was phenomenal. First team FCS All-American last year. He was tied for first in the FCS and tackles in the backfield. He had 23 and a half TFLs as a middle linebacker. He, in his career, 150 tackles, 27 and a half tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, and 99 tackles, 23 and a half tackles for loss, and 6.5 sacks just came last year. So I think this is a kid who's got a lot of his best football in front of him. And he's just a junior.
There's a group to find success in 2025. Who do you think needs to step up the most?
To step up the most, I'm looking a lot at Dorian Pringle. He was someone who I was very high on when he committed. He comes from a high school powerhouse in Northeast Ohio. He comes from Massillon, Washington. So he knows winning football. He's coached by some of the best in the state. And I think he's someone who can really, really flourish and give the opportunity. And it'll be interesting to see who exactly is going to step out there come week one, because there's a lot of talent, I think, in this linebacker room. You've got Lamprin and you've got Pringle, and you've got Jabari Mitchell, who was a 3-star. And you have another kid in Devin Taborn, who transferred in from Mount Union, where they're D3, which is a little bit different than D1, but I don't think they're that different. And just like Massillon at a different level, all Mountain Union knows how to do is win.
The defensive backfield will look totally different here in 2025, similar to heading into 2024. This unit loses their top two cornerbacks in Jordan Oladokin and Ja'Cory Benjamin to graduation. Safety C.J. Brown and Tracy Revels, they hit the portal. In fact, this group lost 10 of their top 12 tacklers from a year ago. Those 10 players accounted for 89.1% of the snaps played last year. This 2025 team is highlighted by the returns of safety Darius Lorfils and Kello Pascal. He briefly entered the portal but then withdrew. How did this team go about addressing those losses in the offseason?
I think they did a pretty darn good job of fixing some of these. They brought in JoJo Johnson, who was coming out of high school, was at Notre Dame, spent a year at an Iowa community college, and then spent the last 2 years at Indiana. And then, as I mentioned, you bring in McClendon, who has a ton of experience down at Tennessee State. And then you bring back Kello Pascal, who played more towards the end of the year. He had a really good game against Ball State, led the team in tackles. Everything I've heard about him is that he's an athletic freak. They call him Superman simply just because he can do things like Superman. And just looking at what Jalen McClendon did in his career at Tennessee State, just because I do want to highlight this as a pretty recent addition through the portal. He had 66 tackles last year. He had a pick, and the big eye-popping stat that I look at when I look at his stats aren't 100% everything. It all comes down to what happened on the field. He broke up 19 passes last year, which that's pretty darn good according to my calculations. So that's someone who would be really big to get in the secondary, especially a very young and inexperienced secondary. Like you mentioned, the only two guys really who saw the field last year were Pascal and Lorfils, and Lorfils missed the back half of the year with an injury. Opened the door for Revels to come in and play super well, which allowed him to hit the portal and get some of the looks that he's getting. So you bring in those two guys and Johnson and McClendon, and I think I was going into the spring portal and going into spring ball, I was very worried about what the secondary was going to look like, because it was, just going the list. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys who are sophomores or younger. So not a whole lot of experience outside of Pascal and Lorfils. Now you bring in guys who have seen the field quite a bit, especially with McClendon and Johnson as well. So I think this secondary is in a much better place than it was about 3 or so months ago.
What are your expectations for this defensive backfield?
To be, not that I don't want to set super high expectations, because I think they deserve the high expectation, but the secondary the last 2 years was one of the best in the country. In pass defense last year, they were at the very least in the top 15. They might have been in the top 10 if I recall correctly. You led by Jordan Oladokin, and you got guys like Ja'Cory Benjamin and like Todd Bumphus, who are now gone, and CJ Brown, who played a big role at the safety position. And I don't want to set I want to set the bar that high, and I think they can maintain that, but just until I know how well the system has been, the transition from system to system has gone. I think they should be pretty good this year. I think they're in good hands, and it helps as well that the secondary coach and the DB's coach, or the secondary coach and the cornerbacks coach, are two very experienced guys. The secondary coach, Derek Jackson, was one of the 4 coaches from Loeffler's staff that were retained. And then you bring in Richard Nutt, who was the DB's coach at Tennessee State, now to be the cornerbacks coach here. And he's got experience all over the place. Everywhere he goes, the secondary plays really well. He's been everywhere in Ohio. He was at Kent State. He was at Ohio State. He coached for the Cleveland Browns for a year as well. So he's someone who's got a lot of experience and knows a thing or two about coaching defensive backs.
All right, Rhys, if you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
I'm going to go with Collins Achimpong here, because between his athletic prowess and the fact that he should hopefully get the chance to step on a football field, assuming he's fully healthy and hoping he's fully healthy, I think he should be able to thread through these Mid-American Conference tackles, and even some of the tackles in the out-of-conference slate for this year, which features Cincinnati and Liberty and Louisville, and those are 3 teams who are pretty darn good up in the trenches. So I am really looking at Collins to finally have not only a season, but a fantastic season.
Let's move over to the special teams and how's that unit looking? And do you have any concerns heading into 2025?
The biggest concern is right now, I feel like with the kicker. They started the year, Jackson Cleather was the starting kicker. He missed his opening the first extra point of the season. He hooked it right. After that, he was pretty darn good. And then he went down with an injury against Northern Illinois. And Zach Long comes in, who has nothing but the kickoff specialist. He was at Troy the first couple of years of his college career. Last year was his first year at BG. He was mainly the kickoff guy. And after Cleather gets hurt, he had to step in and take over the primary kicking duties. And he was good for a bulk of his stint, but in the NIU game as well as the bowl game, he struggled quite a bit. He missed a few kicks in both of those games. So I think that's kind of the biggest worry with me, is just what's going to happen with the starting kicker role.
Now that spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into 2025?
Just overall,
Yeah.
I would probably say right now it might be the cop-out answer, but I'm going to go quarterback just because that's the leader of the offense especially, but that's also, you expect the quarterback to lead the team just as a whole. And right now there's kind of a spot there as we don't really know what's going to happen, whether it's going to be Pine coming out of the gate. And even that, Pine hasn't started more than a game or two in a season since 2022 with Notre Dame. So he's seen the field since, of course, with Arizona State and Missouri. Hasn't blown the numbers off the jumbotron. And then with Lucian Anderson, who with last spring with Connor Bazelak and Camden Orthworth both dealing with injuries, so Lucian Anderson got the bulk of the snaps with the first team last year, and he struggled a little in his limited time throwing the football with BG. He had to come in and against NIU because Bazelak went down. He struggled a little bit. He threw a pick. He only completed, I think, like 2 of 10 attempts. And then Baron May has thrown just one pass since he's gotten to BG. So the biggest thing that worries me is just the fact that we don't know what the quarterback room is going to look like in terms of experience. When with Drew Pine coming in, he's got the most experience of anybody, and he's only played a handful of games.
Well, in today's age of NIL, revenue sharing, and the transfer portal, how have you seen it change Bowling Green's recruiting philosophy? Do you notice them spending more time recruiting D2 or JUCOs or other D1 transfers, or still just sticking to that high school game?
For the most part, it has been sticking to the high school game. And both Scott Loeffler and Eddie George have echoed this philosophy of, we're going to utilize the transfer portal when we need to. And we saw Loeffler do it the past 3 years since the transfer portal has really blown up. And we saw Eddie George do it here recently, especially with his guys from Tennessee State. But for the most part, a lot of the talent you have seen on the field for BG has been homegrown and brought in from high school ranks. Harold Fannin Jr., his only offer was Bowling Green, at least on 24/7 Sports. His only offer was Bowling Green. Terrion Stewart, homegrown. He was at Bowling Green from 2020 all the way up until December of this year. Jordan Oladokin was a transfer guy, but he only spent a year or two at his prior stop. Actually, I think he only spent a year. He was at Samford before. He spent a year at Samford and then 4 years with BG. So a lot of this talent that we've seen on the field have been guys who were recruited out of high school by Bowling Green, stuck with Bowling Green, and eventually saw it pay off. Now, whether that is going to change, it hasn't changed just yet over the last few recruiting classes. even with some of these schools throwing money at BG's guys and being able to pry them away. They've been able to fill holes with guys who were developed here. And I think that's going to continue until it's unbearable to the point where you're seeing guys come here for a year or less than a year and then get out of Dodge because they're not going to get playing time or they're not making enough money. And that's, kind of the issue is that these guys aren't giving themselves a chance to sit and develop and work for the money.
What do you think the main strength of the 2025 team will be?
I think it'll be the run game. Again, like I said, Eddie George said that he's going to prioritize the run game. The offensive line is mostly coming back, and the offensive line was fantastic in the run last year. And it'll, you mentioned with Partridge's running backs, there's going to be a guy that averages 900 yards, and there's going to be a guy who averages 700 yards, or So I think the run game is going to be where it's really going to stick out. It all just kind of comes down to how long it takes for whatever. If there is a new look offensive line, depending on how long it takes for that to come out, and then how well the running backs take to get accustomed to a new scheme.
So there's new head coach. I would say you've had a successful last couple of years. What does success look like for the Falcons in 2025?
I think in my opinion, I think I would take success as making a bowl game, because you have, obviously the standards are high right now because you have back-to-back 7-win seasons, but last year's team featured 24 seniors or something like that. It was an absurd number of seniors, plus you've got other guys who still had eligibility left hitting the portal and leaving. So when it all comes down to it, you've got probably close to 40 guys missing from the team, and most of those guys were people who contributed heavily. So I think with an entirely new team, or an almost entirely new team, an entirely new coaching staff almost, I think it's going to – 5 wins is kind of the mark I'm going to set. But I think the mark I'm going to set is for 5 games, just solely based on the fact that a ton of talent was lost, a ton of production was lost. It's a new head coach. It's a new OC. It's a new DC. It's new running backs and wide receivers coach and tight ends coach. And the defensive line coach is new, and the linebackers coach is new, and the corners coach is new. So I'm going to set it at 5, just to not be a glass half empty guy, but to kind of temper my expectations, because despite my pedigree as a Cleveland sports fan who has seen nothing but despair for the last 22 years of my life, I like to be, somewhat optimistic. So I'm trying to kind of curb myself here and be like, hey, things might not work out the way that you expect them to for this first year, or maybe even the first 2 years. There's going to be growing pains. So I think just looking at it, and even looking at BG's schedule for this upcoming year, I mentioned the out-of-conference games in Lafayette, which should be a win. And then you go to Cincinnati. You play at Nippert Stadium. You have Liberty at home, who's time and time again one of the best group of 5 teams. And then you're at Louisville. Then you've got Ohio, who is the reigning MAC champions. You've got Toledo at home. You've got Central Michigan, who's going to have a new look. You've got Kent State going through some things right now. You've got Buffalo at home, which Buffalo was a sneakily good team last year. They under Pete Lembo. No one really had expectations for them, and they came out and were fantastic. Eastern Michigan in Ypsilanti, Akron, who has continued to get better every year, and then you've got UMass, who BG and UMass haven't faced each other in years, so who knows what's going to happen there. And UMass has an entirely new look as well now. So there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of some of these games on the schedule, and the rest of those that aren't super uncertain are ones that are going to be tough.
And as you talk about this, and as we, from when we started to here we are now, at the end, it definitely makes me feel like this running game is going to be big, because if you're still trying to figure out what you're going to do on defense and what that lineup looks with how many people that you lost, if I can control the ball as well as I can, and I can keep my defense off the field for as long as I can, and I'm able to run the ball, effectively with these 4 offensive linemen that come back from last year, I think that's going to be the recipe for success. So I think it just kind of, in hearing everything, it's like, okay, well, we could pass the ball. There's a lot of different options, but yeah, it definitely seems like running the ball is going to be the best way to go.
Yeah, and everything I'm saying could be 100% wrong, could be 100% right. But like I said, the thing with that's the fun of being in this industry, is that you can make predictions and sound like an expert, but it's you're either going to be 100% right and look like a genius, or you're going to fall flat on your face. And
yeah, we're sickos. We're here. It's April 23rd.
Exactly.
Behind the curtain. I'm not sure when this will drop, probably a week from today or so, but it's April 23rd, and we're talking about, the season that's going to kick off at the end of August.
Yeah, it's April, and I'm already thinking about midweek MACtion. I mean, what else? What more do you need?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything else you want to share, think we should know about this 2025 Bowling Green Falcons football team?
I think I covered just about everything I wanted to say, and I'll reiterate again. I think this is a team that could do great things, but also I would probably advise people maybe to temper their expectations a little bit, just because we don't know how well this team is going to mesh right away with all of the new faces and transfers and the new coaching staff and new system and everything like that.
Well, Rhys, thank you for taking time out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge. We greatly appreciate it.
You guys for having me on.
If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.